The day humanity walked into the grand convocation hall of the hegemony, I was sitting in my observation pod, sipping a glass of chilled Valori extract, absolutely convinced that the next 6 minutes would be the most boring 6 minutes of my career. I was wrong, by approximately, let us say, 5 minutes and 46 seconds. My name is Vorrath, Senior Council Analyst, 42 years of service to the Galactic hegemony. I have watched species beg, grovel, negotiate, threaten, cry, and once, memorably faint. I have documented the Keth sovereignty's 40-hour peace summit. I have survived 3 separate incidents involving the Durranian ambassador and what he called cultural hand gestures. I thought I had seen everything this galaxy had to offer. Then the humans arrived, and everything I knew about everything turned out to be, quite generously, almost nothing. The request had come in 14 cycles prior, a single transmission from the species catalogued under designation G7741, colloquially known as humans, formerly registered as Terrans from a mid-range death world orbiting a yellow dwarf star. Their application for emergency council access had been stamped, reviewed, debated, nearly rejected twice, and finally approved on the basis that they had technically already been approved for observer status 6 years ago, and no one had remembered to revoke it after the incident at Perimeter Station 9, which is a different story, one I am not legally permitted to tell. The point is, they were allowed in, and I was assigned to document whatever followed. Ambassador Della Muros entered the hall first. I had read her file, 43 years old by Terran standard count. Former military, former diplomat, former something called a hostage negotiator, which I had looked up and then immediately set the file down and poured myself an additional glass of Valori. She had a record of successful negotiations totaling 68, failed negotiations totaling 0, one negotiation that technically ended with the building she was inside collapsing, and she still somehow walked out with a signed agreement. The file classified that outcome as a contextual success. I classified it as deeply, profoundly alarming. She walked in wearing the standard Terran diplomatic uniform, dark jacket, straight posture, jaw set like she was already mildly annoyed at the room and had decided to be polite about it anyway. Behind her came 2 aides, a compact, quick-eyed young man named Rocco Pell, and a taller woman named Savio Wen, who carried a case that the security scanners flagged as containing, and I am quoting directly, 17 items of unclear purpose, none of which are weapons by any definition we currently recognize. That note should have been the moment someone asked a follow-up question. No one did. The Grand Convocation Hall seats 412 delegates representing every recognized species in the hegemony. On this particular morning, with emergency session protocols active, it held 207. The rest were either absent, in transit, or, in the case of the Morellian bloc, staging a passive protest by participating via holographic projection while physically sitting in a restaurant 2 levels below the building. I respected the commitment. High Arbiter Jonic Vael called the session to order. He was a tall, silver-ridged Selene male, with exactly the kind of face that had spent 6 decades looking disappointed in everyone around him and had simply stopped trying to disguise it. He was efficient, precise, and had, in my estimation, the interpersonal warmth of a decommissioned navigation beacon. He was also, as it turned out, the reason this day almost ended very differently. The Terran delegation is recognized, Vael announced, in a tone suggesting he was doing them a favor they did not deserve and would like them to acknowledge that fact. Ambassador Muros stepped forward. She did not bow. Terrans technically acknowledged the custom of bowing, but had, somewhere in their cultural history, decided it was optional depending on the situation, and she had clearly assessed this situation as one where it was not. High Arbiter, Council, thank you for granting this session. Her voice was even measured, the kind of voice that had, I suspected, talked people out of doing extremely stupid things on a number of occasions. I found myself paying attention in a way I had not paid attention to a speaker in quite some time. We are here because 14 days ago, a hegemony supply convoy traveling through Sector Vos 4 was attacked. 23 vessels, 19 destroyed, 4 captured. The crews of those 4 vessels are currently being held at a location we have identified, by a group the Council has publicly classified as a minor piracy operation, with no significant threat rating. She paused. The hall was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not peaceful, but is instead the sound of 207 species, all suddenly paying very close attention. We disagree with that classification, she said, significantly. High Arbiter Vael pressed his fingertips together. The VOS-4 incident has been reviewed by the Security Directorate and assessed as an isolated criminal act. The Council's response has been formally tabled for standard review cycle, which will conclude in approximately 40 days. The hostages will not survive 40 days. That is a projection, not a certainty. No, Muros said, that is a fact. Because the group holding them is not a minor piracy operation. They are a coordinated military force with backing from at least 2 hegemony member states, operating under a cover identity, and their actual goal is not ransom. It is to provoke a military response from the Council that they can use as a justification to formally withdraw from the hegemony and take 11 border systems with them. The silence after that sentence was the loudest silence I had ever recorded in 42 years. Vael's expression did not change. That was actually more unsettling than if it had. That is a significant accusation, he said carefully. Yes, Muros agreed. It is. Do you have evidence to support it? We have considerable evidence to support it. We also have a problem. Which is? Muros glanced briefly at the 207 delegates surrounding her. She glanced at the broadcast transmission nodes sending this session to approximately 4,000 remote observers across the hegemony. She glanced at the security personnel stationed at the 6 entry points, and then she looked back at High Arbiter Vael with the specific expression of someone who has just realized they are standing in the middle of a very large, very populated room, and need to say something that cannot be heard by most of the people in it. Which is, she said quietly, that at least one of the 2 member states involved in this is currently in this room, watching this session, and if we present the evidence publicly, we will lose the only advantage we currently have, which is that they do not yet know we have it. The hall did not erupt. It did something worse. It went very, very still. Vael stared at her for a long moment. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that there is a traitor among the Council. I am suggesting, Muros said, with the particular patience of someone explaining something to a very smart person who is currently choosing not to understand it, that we stop talking about this in front of everyone. Vael drew himself up. 42 years of observing Council politics had given me a precise understanding of what that posture meant. It meant he was about to say something procedurally correct and tactically catastrophic. Ambassador Muros, he said, the Grand Convocation operates under full transparency protocols. Any evidence relevant to Council security must be presented before the full session, or it cannot be formally recognized. Those are the rules of this body, and they exist for excellent reasons. Muros looked at him. High Arbiter, she said, with respect, your rules are about to get 19 people killed and hand a hostile faction the justification they need to split your alliance in half. The rules exist regardless of the consequences. I know, she said. I read the charter 3 times, which is why I also know that emergency protocols allow for closed session briefings when the presiding arbiter determines that open disclosure presents a direct security risk to the hegemony itself. She tilted her head, just slightly. So the question I have for you, High Arbiter, is a simple one. Vael said nothing. How long, Muros asked pleasantly, are you going to keep defending a procedure before you decide to use the power you actually have? I will tell you something about High Arbiter Jonic Vael that his official biography does not mention. He once dismissed a credible assassination warning against himself because the analyst who delivered it had filed the report using the wrong form. The correct report was submitted 4 hours later. The attempt happened 3 hours after that. He survived because his personal aide had the instinct to tackle him sideways behind a refreshment table, and Vael spent the rest of that evening insisting, from the floor, that the aide had acted outside proper protocol. The man was, in the most precise and clinical sense, allergic to being told what to do by anyone who was not already above him in a hierarchy he had personally approved of. Ambassador Muros, as far as Vael was concerned, was a mid-tier representative from a species that had only recently figured out which direction was up in interstellar politics. This was going to be a problem. I watched from my observation pod, Valori extract forgotten and going warm beside me, as Vael straightened to his full height and prepared to deliver what I recognized as his formal refusal posture, shoulders back, chin elevated to a specific angle that his staff privately called the monument. Whatever Muros had just said, however correct it was, however urgently it needed to be heard, Vael was about to bury it under 6 layers of procedural cement and call it governance. Then Rocco Pell, the compact young aide standing 2 steps behind Muros, did something. He sneezed. That sounds insignificant. It was not, because in sneezing, he shifted the case he was carrying, and the case tilted, and one of the 17 items of unclear purpose slid partially out of the unsealed top and became briefly visible to the security sensor array before he caught it and tucked it back. The sensor array logged it instantly. The log went to the security station. The security officer on duty, a young hegemony lieutenant named Oral Das, looked at the reading, looked at it again, and then did something I had never seen a junior security officer do in a formal council session. He stood up. "Hi, Arbiter." His voice cracked slightly on the second word. He was young, probably his first major posting, almost certainly his worst day so far. "I need to report a sensor flag." Vael turned. The monument posture faltered. "This is not the appropriate moment, Lieutenant." "Sir, the flag is a Class 7 proximity alert." Oral Das swallowed. "The item in the Terran delegation's case is emitting a low-band signal, encrypted, and it has been since they entered the building." The hall reacted. Not loudly, not dramatically. The reaction of 207 experienced political minds simultaneously recalculating everything they had assumed about the last 15 minutes was more like a shift in atmospheric pressure than a sound. "You felt it before you heard it." Muros did not flinch. She turned, looked at Roko Pell with the expression of someone whose plan had taken an unscheduled detour, and then looked back at Vael. "Hi, Arbiter," she said. "I can explain what that device is." "You will explain it," Vael said, and for the first time his voice had dropped the procedural tone entirely. This was something older, something that had been a soldier before it became an administrator. Now, "It is a signal jammer," Muros said. "Specifically, it jams the type of encrypted short-burst transmitter used to relay live session content to external receivers operating outside official broadcast channels." The pressure shift happened again, bigger this time. "In plain language," Muros continued, her voice carrying clearly across every corner of the silent hall, "someone in this room has been transmitting everything said in this session to a receiver we are not authorized to see. The jammer has been blocking that transmission since we walked through the door. Whatever we have said in the last 11 minutes, the people who should not have heard it, have not heard it." Vael stared at her. "You brought an active jamming device," he said slowly, "into the Grand Convocation Hall." "Yes. That is a violation of 17 separate security statutes." 16, Muros said. "I checked. Statute 9 only applies to military-grade systems, and this is technically classified as a communications management tool under Terran commercial law. But yes, approximately 16. "And you did this," Vael said, "because you believed someone in this room was transmitting our session externally." "I did this," Muros said, "because I knew someone was. We identified the transmission signature 8 days ago. We tracked the relay pattern. We know the channel. We also know that whoever is using it activated it 30 seconds after this session was announced, which means they were given the session schedule before it was publicly posted, which means the leak is inside your own administrative structure, High Arbiter, and has been for longer than this situation has existed." The hall was by this point producing a sound I had never heard before and have not heard since. It was the sound of an entire room of experienced politicians being several steps behind a human diplomat and being aware of it. Vael sat down. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not a collapse or a defeat. It was the movement of a man who had just recalculated an enormous number of things and needed a moment to let the new figures settle. He sat, and he looked at Muros, and something in the monument posture was simply gone. "You planned this," he said, not accusing, almost wondering. "We planned for several versions of this," Muros said. "This is version 4. Version 1 assumed you would agree to a closed session immediately. Version 2 assumed you would need more convincing. Version 3 assumed a procedural delay of up to 30 minutes. And version 4. Muros almost smiled. Version 4 assumed the jammer would be flagged by your sensors, which would then make the existence of the unauthorized transmission a security matter rather than a diplomatic one, which falls under a completely different set of protocols, which do authorize you to convene an immediate closed session for security review without a full floor vote." She paused. "We prefer version 1. Version 4 is messier, but it works." Vael was quiet for a long moment. "Lieutenant Das," he said finally. Oral Das, who had been standing at his station with the expression of someone who had no idea whether they were about to be promoted or arrested, straightened sharply. "Sir, initiate Security Protocol 7, seal the hall, flag all external transmission nodes for audit review, and contact the Directorate for an emergency closed assessment." He stood. This session is suspended pending security verification. The hall erupted then, properly this time. Delegates talking, aides leaning in, the Murelian holographic projections flickering because the representative downstairs had apparently knocked something over in their surprise. I was typing so fast my transcription buffer nearly overloaded. Through all of it, Muros stood in the center of the floor, perfectly still, watching Vael issue the orders that she had, through 4 contingency plans and 1 perfectly timed sneeze, managed to make him want to give. The closed session lasted 6 hours. I was not in it. My clearance level, which I had always considered impressively high, turned out to be impressively insufficient for whatever was being said in that room. I waited outside with a cold glass of Valori extract and approximately 400 years of combined anxiety from the aides and junior delegates also excluded from the proceedings. What I know of what happened inside, I know from the formal record released 11 days later, after the operation it enabled had been completed. The evidence Muros presented identified both member states involved, named the specific officials, laid out the communication chain, the financing structure, and the operational timeline, showed that the hostage situation in Sector Vos 4 was not the beginning of the plan, it was the trigger, the moment designed to provoke exactly the response Vael had been prepared to give, a formal military escalation, broad enough to be called aggression, public enough to be broadcast. What she also presented, and what the formal record spends considerably less time on, was the extraction plan her team had already built. A quiet operation, no hegemony military signature, no official authorization trail, the kind of operation that had no name, and would, if successful, leave no record except 19 people walking out of a facility that would afterward be reported as having suffered an unexplained power failure. The Council did not officially approve the operation. They officially approved a security review and a closed diplomatic assessment. Unofficially, Vael looked at Muros across the table and asked a single question. "How long do you need?" 14 hours, she said. "You have 12, he said. "Because after 12 hours I have to file a status report with the full council, and I would prefer to report a resolution rather than an ongoing situation." Muros nodded. 12 is fine. She was back in 11 hours and 46 seconds. 19 crew members recovered. No hegemony casualties. The facility's power failure was, according to the subsequent technical investigation, attributable to what the report called an unexpected cascade failure of undetermined origin. And I have read enough Terran operational debriefs by now to know that undetermined origin is their paperwork's way of smiling at you. The 2 member states involved requested emergency diplomatic review before the operation was even confirmed complete. They had apparently received word through channels that their plan had not only failed but had been comprehensively documented, and they had made the rapid calculation that cooperation was preferable to the alternative. Vael accepted their request, with conditions that I am told were delivered in a tone of voice that made several senior diplomats quietly grateful they were not on the receiving end. On her way out of the building, 11 hours and 46 seconds after walking back in, Ambassador Muros passed my observation pod. She did not know I was there. She was talking to Rocco Pell, her voice low, her posture finally, for the first time that day, something other than perfectly controlled. "You couldn't have warned me about the sneeze," she said. Rocco Pell had the dignity to look guilty. It was the dust in the ventilation. I couldn't help it. 11 minutes of operational jamming, 2 backup protocol switches, and the thing that almost unraveled everything was dust. "Version 4 worked," he offered. Muros stopped walking. She looked at him with the expression of someone choosing, carefully and deliberately, not to say several things she was thinking. "Version 4, she said, "always works." She kept walking. I sat in my observation pod for a long time after that, looking at my notes and my cold Valori extract and the empty hall where, 6 hours earlier, a species that the hegemony had catalogued as mid-tier and non-critical had walked in with a jammer, a sneeze, 4 contingency plans, and the particular brand of calm confidence that comes not from believing nothing can go wrong, but from having already decided what to do when it does. I updated my report that evening. In the field marked Threat Assessment, Terran Diplomatic Corps, I crossed out what was previously written there and typed 2 words. Pay attention.